Hey, Timmy, did those bullies from school beat you up again?
Yeah.
What if I told you there was a way to beat the bullies back?
Oh gosh, really? That'd be swell!
What you need is chaos. Chaos comes in all different shapes and sizes.
Gee willikers, how does it work?
Well, little Timmy, we have to find the right kind of chaos god that suits you. There are so many to choose from the bloodthirsty corn to the god of disease himself, Papa Nergal. The possibilities are truly endless. We can really show those bullies what for. To train you to be a mighty Chaos Warlord, we'll be putting you through the war simulation of Forbidden Stars. This might look like a game, but this is just a taste of what the real war for Chaos entails. You and your opponents are attempting to collect lost relics and sites of power in the form of objective tokens. The first player to collect a number of objective tokens equal to the number of players is the victor. At the beginning of each game, every player chooses a faction they want to play as. All factions have their own special abilities, units, and cards associated with them. Now, firstly, Timmy, you'll need to choose a faction you want to join. But you know the right answer, don't you, Timmy? Once everyone has chosen a faction, each player claims the components for their faction. This should include all cards, miniatures, tokens, and the tile that their faction symbol is on. Then determine the first player by any randomized method you see fit. After which, players must create the game board. Every player first claims their home system and 2 objectives from every other player. Then, every player is randomly given 2 system tiles they can use, so every player should end up with 3 system tiles and 2 objective tokens from every opposing player. Starting with the first player and going clockwise, each player places 1 system tile down, adjacent to another system tile. Then he places any number of initial units and structures on this tile on any planets or voids. System placement must adhere to the size restriction depending on the number of players. The player must then place a single objective of each of his opponent's objective tokens on one of the planets on a system he just placed. Then, starting with the player who placed the final system down and proceeding counterclockwise, each player is then dealt a warp storm and places it along the edge of any system. These may be the edges of the game board. An introductory setup is available in the How to Play booklet if you choose to use it, but we personally recommend making the board, as it adds a lot of strategic depth to the game. After the board is set, players organize their play area by shuffling all of his event cards and placing them face down. These event cards are easily identified by either showing Scheme or Tactic in the center. Then he makes his starting combat deck by shuffling the 10 combat cards with their faction symbol on the top left into a combat deck, and setting the other combat cards and order upgrades aside for future use. The combat and event decks must remain face down, and everything else may stay face up. Lastly, set the round tracker to 1, and a spot should be dedicated to the supply for all players to pull from, by putting the dice, structures, and the reinforcement, cash, and forge tokens within easy reach of everyone. A game of Forbidden Stars is broken up into 3 phases players play in order, starting with the planning phase, where all players take turns placing order tokens on the board to be resolved later. Next is the operations phase, where players take turns resolving the orders they placed on the board. Lastly is the refresh phase, where players score objectives, collect material to spend on units and upgrades, rally any routed units, move the nefarious warp storms, resolve any event cards, and finally, pass the first player token and advance the round tracker. This continues until a player collects enough objectives, or at the end of the 8th round. During the planning phase, all players take turns placing orders face down on the board. These orders are resolved during the operations phase. Starting with the first player, everyone places a single order token face down on its system. If there is already an order token on the intended system, the player simply places the order on top of the other, so the order token on the top of the stack should always be the most recently played order. A note: a player cannot place an order on a system if they do not have a unit or structure either in or adjacent to that system. Systems adjacent share an edge. If they only share a corner, they are not adjacent. There are 4 different types of orders the players may use during the planning phase. These orders are Deploy, Strategize, Dominate, and Advance. Each faction has 2 copies of each order. When a player resolves an order during the operations phase, that system becomes the active system. The first of the orders is Deploy. Deploy allows players to spend resources in order to recruit new units and build structures. When a deploy order is revealed, the player firstly purchases units and then purchases structures. When purchasing units, the player must have a controlled factory in the system. Then spend the amount of material required by decreasing the number on the resource dial. This cost is displayed on the faction sheet. The newly purchased units can then be placed on any friendly or uncontrolled area in the active system. Some more powerful units cost a forge token in addition to their material cost. This will be displayed under the unit's resource cost. There is a maximum to the number of units that can be purchased in a single deploy order. This limit is dictated by the unit capacity of the planet the factory is located on. Unit capacity is shown as skulls underneath the planet. In addition to needing resources in order to purchase units, players must have sufficient command level in order to purchase units. Player's command level starts at 0, and it grows by 1 for every city that he controls. After units are purchased, buildings may be constructed by spending the resources displayed on the faction sheet, same as units. These buildings then can be only placed on friendly worlds by placing that faction's square building token and placing it and the building on the planet. It is important to note that planets may only have a single building on it at a given time. The next order is Dominate. Dominate lets players gather assets from worlds under their control and use their faction's specific special ability. When a Dominate order is revealed, the active player gathers assets from all friendly worlds in the active system. Assets are shown on the right side of the planet's banner in the form of either forge, cash, reinforcement, or the prosperity icons. Forge tokens allow the construction of very powerful units, and also allow a player to reduce the command level requirement of a single unit by 1, meaning a Space Marine player could purchase a single squad of Space Marines at command level 0. Cash tokens allow a player to purchase a single unit or structure at a 2 material discount. Reinforcement tokens are used during the reinforcement step of combat, and will be explained later. Prosperity allows a player to take either a forge, cash, or reinforcement token of his choice. The second step of Dominate allows a player to use their faction's special ability, which is listed on the center of the faction sheet. Chaos's ability, for instance, allows you to take a single cultist from the system with the Dominate order and place it on a friendly or uncontrolled world in an adjacent system. Next is the Strategize order, which allows players to upgrade their orders and/or combat deck for later use. It also allows the player to draw and resolve event cards at the end of the round. There are 2 kinds of upgrades the players may choose from. First of which is auto upgrades, which increase the effectiveness of one of the 4 orders at your disposal. Work Faster, for instance, allows the orc player to build structures before purchasing units, which could be used to build a factory and then buy units. The other upgrade type is combat upgrades. These cards come in pairs, and are more efficient variants of cards in a starting combat deck. When a player purchases a combat upgrade, he receives both copies of it, and must switch out 2 copies of another card in his deck for the new upgrade, meaning a combat deck should always consist of 5 different cards, each with 2 copies of it. Like units, upgrade cards have a command level requirement, which must be met. Forge and Cache tokens cannot be used to reduce the cost or requirement of upgrades. After the Strategize order is finished, the active player takes his Strategize token and places it on the top of the event deck for use at the end step of the round. The last order available is Advance, which allows players to move units and start combat. Advance orders should be placed in a system the player is attempting to move to or start combat in. To resolve an advanced order, players first move ships in the active system and move ships from one adjacent system onto any voids in the active system. Then players move ground units by forming a path. A path is a series of contiguous, non-diagonal friendly areas. This could be an adjacent planet, a void with friendly ships, or a planet with friendly units or buildings in it. But like moving ships, players may only move units from the active system and a single adjacent system to the active one. It is also important to note that every area has a unit capacity, which is noted as skulls in the planet's banner. A void always has a capacity of 3. These limits do not limit how many units may move into the area, only once an advance order is resolved. It is also important to note that warp storms thwart any attempts to move from one system to another. After resolving an advance order, including combat, if there are still more units in the given area than the planet or void's capacity, that player must select and destroy any units until the capacity is adhered to. The final part of the advance order is combat, which we will explain in the next section. After every player has placed 4 order tokens, the operations phase begins, by every player, starting with the first player revealing one of their orders, resolving it, and then the player clockwise of them does the same. The orders a player can reveal must be on top of a given stack, so any orders underneath a player's token cannot be activated yet. A player also must activate an order once their turn comes round, unless every order is underneath another player's. This continues until every player has activated and resolved their 4 orders. The final phase of the game is the refresh phase. in which players gain materials, objectives, rally any routed units, draw and resolve event cards, and move warp storms. Starting with objectives, every player collects objectives on planets he currently controls and places them on his faction sheet. If a player has collected a number of objectives equal to the number of players, that player is the winner. Then every player gains materials from controlled worlds by adding up the material value of every planet and increasing the material dial by that value. Next, every player rallies any routed units on the board by turning them back on their base. Finally, players draw and resolve event cards. Each player draws a number of event cards equal to the number of strategized tokens on the event deck and resolves a single event by first moving warp storms the direction indicated by the card itself. Players may move any warp storm that has not already been moved this round. Warp storms can be placed on the edge of the map, but may not overlap each other. Even if a player did not play a strategized order this turn, he still moves a warp storm by drawing the top card of their event deck. After warp storms are placed, each player, starting with the first player, resolves the effect of their events. There are two types of events, tactics and schemes. Tactics activate immediately and are then shuffled back into their event deck. Schemes work slightly differently and instead are placed face down next to the player sheet. These schemes may then be activated at certain times indicated by the card to give you buffs or let you skew things in your favor. After everything in the refresh phase is complete, the round tracker is advanced and the first player token is passed clockwise. If this was the end of the 8th round, the game ends and the player with the most objective tokens wins. After an order token is resolved and there are friendly and enemy units in the same area, combat must be resolved. This is considered the contested area. During combat, the player resolving the advance order is considered the attacker, and the other player is the defender. When combat begins, players take note of several values of their units that are in combat. On the right-hand side of the faction sheet lists combat value, health value, and morale. To prepare for combat, players add up the combat value of all their units they control in the fight. This denotes how many dice each player rolls when fighting starts. After dice have been rolled and all dice have been organized by a result, players each shuffle their combat decks and draw 5 cards. These cards will be used to boost your units during the battle, and this hand stays the same throughout the fight. Then, starting with the attacker and then the defender, each player may commit reinforcement tokens into the fight. These reinforcement tokens act as level 0 ships or units of your faction. They do not contribute dice to the fight, but still provide morale, can be used to activate some cards' abilities, and be used to soak up damage received. After preparation is complete, the first execution round begins, with each player choosing a combat card and placing it face down in front of them. Then, starting with the attacker, each player reveals the combat cards and applies effects. Every combat card is split into 3 sections. On the left of the card lists the same attack, defense, and morale symbols the dice show, and add to combat the same way the dice do during the resolution. Next, the general ability that activates. This could range from getting a new dice to roll, to gaining attack tokens and forcing you or your opponent to reroll dice. Finally is the unit ability. These abilities associate with specific units in your arsenal, and to use these abilities, you must have the specific unit unrouted and in combat. Once the cards have been revealed, damage assessment can take place, starting with the attacker. Each player adds up the number of offense icons on dice, cards, and tokens, and compares it to the defense icons on his side. Each defense icon cancels out a single offense icon, and if there is no damage left over after cancellation, no damage is accrued. If damage is still present, that player must choose a friendly unit in combat to suffer the damage. Damage must be applied to an unrouted unit unless all other units are already routed. If the damage equals or exceeds the chosen unit's health value, that unit is destroyed. It is important to note that you must assign all the current damage to one unit, and may not divide up damage. Any leftover damage after a unit is destroyed continues to the next unit, and so on. If the damage is lower than their health, their unit is routed instead. Routed units are placed on their side and do not contribute morale, and cannot be used to activate unit-specific combat cards. After both players have suffered damage, if only a single player has units remaining, he wins the combat, and may capture any structures on the planet. If there are still units on both sides, combat continues by first discarding any tokens, selecting a new combat card and placing it face down. Dice and previously played combat cards remain in play and still contribute to the fight. It is important to note that damage does not pass on to future rounds, so any damage previously suffered does not need to be tracked. After 3 full rounds of combat, if there are still opposing units in combat, the winner of combat is determined by morale. Each player adds up unrouted units, dice, and combat cards' morale results. Whomever has the higher morale at this point is considered the victor. Ties go to the defender. The loser of combat must retreat by either returning to an area other than the contested area following a legal path, and must move back to an area that at least one unit moved from if they were the attacker. For defenders, retreating must be done by moving remaining units to either a friendly or uncontrolled area along a legal path to the current system, or an adjacent system. In addition to conducting combat with the advanced order, players can also resolve an orbital strike. If there are no contested areas after an advanced order is resolved, a player can use any ships adjacent to a planet to perform an orbital strike by adding up the combat value of other ships in a void and rolling. Any offense icons revealed cause damage to the enemy units on the planet. The defending player does not get to roll dice to defend and must apply damage normally. Planets with a bastion on it are immune to orbital strikes. And if you order right now, you'll get a free flaming sword!